Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Lynn, for inviting me tonight, and thank you for all of you coming out on a cold night. Prisons and prisoners is not a very exciting subject for most. In fact, for many in the community, they're full of fear because the media has generated a lot of fear about who a prisoner is and what maybe they might or might not do in our community. So what I want to focus on initially is the fact that the subject is the prisoner in our midst. And I gave considerable thought to this, and before coming I thought, no, I'm going to emphasise in our midst. And but firstly, who are these people? Are they another breed? Are they people who we should have nothing to do with? Clearly, that's not what the mercy ministries of Matthew 25 talk about. However, I would like to suggest to you that people in prison are no different to people in this room, because the cross-section of society actually is, and the people in prison is actually a microcosm of our society. And so you will find mechanics and teachers and jockeys and fitters and turners and lots of different people who represent a cross-section of our community. And you wouldn't know it if you were to walk down the street many times. How are you ever going to know? Because I can assure you they certainly don't have super thick eyebrows all cluttered up together and necessarily big burly and lots of tattoos. So we have to remove the stereotype from what and who we think a prisoner is. It's quite simple. It's someone who's broken the law, they've gone to court and they've done a crime and they need to do their time, which is the law. So the question is, in South Australia, what are the facts? Well, as we sit here tonight, there are about 2,500 people housed in 9 prisons across the state. Nationally, there's close to 35,000 people in over 100 prisons around our country. And every one of them, 99%, are actually going to be released one day. Why? Because the courts deemed it so. Whether we like it or not, whether politicians like it or not, they're coming out. Not en masse, but 2,500 are being catered for now in South Australia. There's a turnover of between 5,000 and 6,000 a year. About 37% are recidivists, meaning they will go back again. That's within the 2-year time frame. Within a 3-year time frame, it's closer to 70%. That is a huge, huge amount. In other words, 70% of people who go in will come out, they will not stabilise their life, or they'll go back to the weakness that got them there in the first place. What's the weakness that got them there? 80% of all crime is drug and alcohol related. And so that's really the root cause of why they steal your car or do a break and enter to feed their drug habit. Right? The profile of the prisoner is that usually many of them have poor literacy and numeracy. They never finished school, they were never encouraged to finish school, and many of them were told that they were rat bags and were continually put down, negatively spoken to, and especially in that first 10 years of their life, probably emotionally, physically abused. And 40% of prisoners now actually have a mental health condition. Some of that is drug-induced psychosis, but our mental health system has failed us, and so what we now have is some people who, with mental health issues, have actually bled over and got themselves caught up with the wrong people and are in prison. That is not the perfect place for them. In fact, that's probably the worst place for them. Neither is it fair on prison officers, because prison officers are not trained in mental health. And so what we have is this almost an explosive situation with these factors that are putting incredible pressure on everyone involved. What I want to emphasise tonight really is attitudes. The community has an attitude, but invariably the community's attitude is fed by the media. Most people have never even walked inside a court. They have no idea what it would be like to support a friend, a mother for example, and I'd like to encourage you, if a neighbour or a friend said, look, I've got to go to court, my son's in trouble, and they say, look, will you just come along with me? Please do that. Please do that. It's actually quite an intimidating experience just to walk into a courtroom not knowing what the judge will say about your son. And I'll put a lot of emphasis on son, because out of the 2,500, about 170 are women. So we have one women's prison, and that's up in Northfield, but all the other prisons are except for about 10 beds up in Port Augusta, but essentially they're mostly males. And a high percentage of those males played around with marijuana in that very important development period between 12 and 14. And that actually has an impact on the development of the brain, especially the emotional component, so that these guys have real difficulty actually forming meaningful relationships, friendships, girlfriends and so forth. And whether you like it or not, a lot of guys just don't grow up till they're about 35. They say that the male brain, if it's not tampered with drugs, actually starts to mature around about 24. But when a guy rings our office and says, I'd like some help, my first question is, and how old are you? Because sometimes what happens is they have an awakening at this, in the mid-30s, oh dear, I have 4 children by 4 different women. What have I done with my life? Do you understand? So the other thing about attitude, the fear factor, is that we could take the attitude that we want nothing to do with them, right? That's usually what most people just want, nothing to do with. That is probably the worst attitude we could ever have, especially as Christians. If we call ourselves Christians, and if someone truly wants to change and turn around, then there's an onus on us to help them the best way possible. The media has a lot to answer for, because it paints a very gruesome picture of who a prisoner is. But when you visit them and meet them, and they're not on their drugs and alcohol, quite frankly, they could be like the guy next door. The attitude of a prisoner, however, when they're coming out of prison, is incredible fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear that no one will be able to accept them ever, that they have already been publicly exposed through the courts. The courts have deemed that they have committed this crime, and they will in turn serve time. The average length of a sentence in this state is 6 years and 4 months. That is an incredible long period. If you have been removed from society, which in effect is the punishment, to lose your freedom is the punishment, not anything else. Just to lose your freedom, that is the punishment. And to be removed from society, 6 years and 4 months, much has changed. In that time, we might have got a new freeway, we might have the ATM PIN number, you know. There's all sorts of little things that we adjust to month to month, year to year. But for someone coming back into the community, they have this incredible fear, because unless they have friends who they can trust, and there are very few of them, I might add, how are they going to cope? The other attitude is my attitude. What is my attitude? And I'm putting myself in this, but I really mean all of us. What is my attitude? Restoration says, help them all we can. Why? Because it's very important to help them turn around. The more someone receives rejection, the more they're going to move away. It's important for them to find meaningful, crime-free activity, to find new friends, because in many cases, in most cases, they actually got into trouble through the negative associates. So a good prison officer will say to someone leaving prison, whatever you do, mate, don't go back to your old coes, don't go back to your old mates, go find some new mates. And so that's part of why Prison Fellowship follows that mandate of visiting prisoners, because we're probably the only straightos they'll ever meet. Because all their friends are in this other druggy type subculture that's slithering away in our community, actually eroding it. And we don't even know. Because some people are good at covering up what their drug-addicted son is doing. And the other thing is, it reduces victims. Restoration, the restoration attitude is, this is good, because the more we turn someone around or help them turn around, it's actually going to reduce the number of victims. And the people who will verify this is actually the Victim Support Service, the Commissioner of Victims. They actually know that this is the right and proper thing to do, because it's more likely that someone will go back to their old ways and get back onto their drugs, go and do that, another break and enter to support their drug habit. Are you with me? Criminologists will say that those that surround themselves with people who believe they can change, they will. And so this is why it's very, very important for someone coming out of prison to actually meet some support while they're in prison. Because just like there's 4 legs on that stool, everybody needs accommodation. They need a supporting network, whether it be family, and many of these people, their family have already rejected them or dumped them, or they've left family behind in another state, or they really had a dysfunctional family. And they need education. And these things, if they don't have them, preferably too, mixed in that is a community of faith. Now, they're not going to come to St Peter's Cathedral next week, right? Unless suddenly St Peter's Cathedral decides we are going to turn our community into a welcoming community. We want this to be a safe place for them and a safe place for us. Because Holy Trinity Brompton in London have done exactly that. They've actually, through the Alpha course, they've actually turned their community into a welcoming community. So it's a safe place for the worshippers, right? And it's a safe place for the prisoners. But you've got to understand that the prisoners who are going to go into any church are people who've probably found the Lord in prison. You know what I'm saying? It's a whole new life. It opens up a whole new door and a whole new socialisation. Yeah? So, what would Jesus do? Well, we know what he did. We know he said to the criminal, today, you know, you will be with me in paradise. Why? Because he repented. He recognised that Christ was who he said he was. He was the Lord. And so he said, you today, you will be with me in paradise. And so we're really at the bottom of the cross, we're all sinners. We're actually, in God's eyes, we're actually all criminals. The question is, have we been caught? Well, he's not mocked. He's seen all our speeding. You know, he knows. He knows. There's nothing, whether it's made public, whether we've been broken the law, everything is known to him. And so he mixed with sinners probably more readily than he did with the Pharisees. Why? Because a sinner knows they're a sinner. You don't need to tell them they're a sinner. You don't need to tell someone in prison that you have sinned. Guess what? The judge told them that. They don't need that. They just need acceptance, and they need to be treated in a humane way. Why? Because respect breeds respect. That's why I'm very strong about having a Christian prison wing, because if you can actually create an environment of acceptance and a place of learning where they actually are studying the scriptures and learning what the Christian life is all about, with prison officers who are not calling them scumbags and cursing them and carrying on, but are actually creating an environment for learning and change, then when the time comes a little closer, you'll be surprised, because respect breeds respect. Are you with me? The other thing I want to bring to your attention is what I call the parable of the older brother. Forget about the prodigal. That parable ain't about the prodigal. Yes, it is about the father's love, but it also exposes older brother. And I have a theory that our churches many times are full of older brothers who want to criticise, oh gee, how come he got the fatted calf and the robe and the ring and the sandals and the big celebration? What's going on here? He squandered everything of his inheritance. Why are we giving younger brother all this attention? And you'll notice that the attitude came out from older brother. Older brother really resented father's love for younger brother. He criticised, he resented, he didn't really even have a proper relationship with his own father, because he said, that son of yours. You know, he didn't even want to go into the celebration. What's going on here? How come he gets the party? I've been here with you all along. So I'm suggesting that many people in the church have an attitude as, how come he got saved? I've been around a church for 50 years. How come he's getting all the attention? Well, guess what? Father thought he was dead. And that's the whole point of Father, the love of the Father, to receive the repentant, prodigal. That's his heart. And many times we as Christians think, how come he got all that? But Father obviously thought his youngest son was dead. Okay, think about that one. Well, what if? What if someone came to St. Peter's and you learned he was a former prisoner? What if? Do you move as far away as you can? Do you keep an eye on him for fear he'll do something shifty? Do you report his every move to the dean? Or make him feel welcome? Because I can tell you it takes an awful lot of courage for anyone who's been in prison to actually come to St. Peter's Cathedral, or any church for that matter, because it's a culture shock. That's not the culture. They only know Jesus as a swear word. They're unchurched. Do you understand? So it's a big effort for anyone who's been in prison to actually go to a church, unless they have a friend who invites them and friends who welcome them. So wisdom says, there's a few things that need to also play in this. Wisdom says that to support ex-offenders, one, that person really does need to be recommended by Prison Fellowship or another Christian ministry, because clearly, you better believe it, Christians are seen by prisoners as a soft target. Okay? So they need to actually have demonstrated in prison to people who visit them on a regular basis that this guy's genuine. This guy really, really, really does want to change and needs all the help they can get. So it's a good idea to have that recommendation. That's wisdom. The other thing is that they've indicated they really do want to change. I can assure you that we don't help people unless they give us some indication that they want to change. Otherwise, we're wasting our time, they're wasting our time. If they want to play games, they can go play games with someone else. You understand what I'm saying? That's wisdom. And there needs to be some sort of evidence that they've made positive choices to make a fresh start. It's not just words. There's some kind of demonstration, and there'll be indicators. You know, there'll be initiative. There'll be just that little bit extra effort on their part that they really do want to change. The other thing that needs to be known is that leadership needs discernment. Just because someone's an ex-prisoner doesn't mean, oh, come on in, yeah, sure, steal the silver, you know what I'm saying. Leadership needs discernment, and so that needs to be a collective effort by those that are around that person. So whether it's the church leadership, the leadership of the ministry that's got to know them, because our volunteers are visiting prisoners every week in Cathedral, in Mobilong, in the pre-release centre, in Yatala, and in their Adelaide Remand Centre. So if you were to say, a neighbour of mine, their son is in Yatala, we could say, would you like us to visit him, or he like, you know what I'm saying? We do get phone calls from well-meaning good parents who've raised their children well in interstate, and our son got to Adelaide, got in with the wrong crowd, they're in the remand centre, will you visit him? Well, guess what? We will visit him because mum and dad have probably been praying for their prodigal son. You know what I'm saying? And you'd be surprised how many people in prison are prodigals, have actually been raised in good Christian homes. You would be surprised. And prisoners will not come to any church, ever, unless they feel safe, it's welcoming, because they have a fear of rejection more than your fear of them. Interesting. So I'm going to park it right there. I hope I've stirred you to maybe ask some questions. I want you to know that I am an authority on this whole subject of being religious and not accepting prisoners, because at the age of 20 I was a self-righteous religious kid. I wanted nothing to do with prisoners. My father had a dream, he wanted to help this person. I knew the story and I said, you have got to be kidding, Dad. I went to a Baptist church and I had made it in